So I want to introduce you to one of my newest heroes, Professor Jeffrey Pulverty. I really hope I'm saying that last name correctly. Jeffrey is an elderly Jewish political science professor who has become one of my heroes because he has said no to mandatory anti-racist training at the school he teaches at. And he did it in a beautiful, diplomatic way that we are going to explore in this video. Now, Jeffrey actually has his own video on the topic where he really, you can't watch even a little bit of this video and not know that this is a genuine, respectable, kind, empathetic person, and I will link it in the description below. Go watch him in his words himself. But we also have Jeffrey's open letter that he wrote about why he is saying no to diversity training. Now, he wrote this open letter a little bit over a month ago, and now, of course, he's facing consequences for that we're going to talk about in this video. First, we're going to read the open letter, and then we're going to show you where things stand today. Now, this might be a little bit of a longer video because he does write a very nuanced, kind, considerate letter to explain exactly why he is not going to complete this training. I think it's phenomenal. I love it when people in higher education push back, and I think he is absolutely an example to follow. But before we read the letter and look at the consequences, listen, folks, a bit of housekeeping. I'm trying to grow my channel, grow the subscriber count, all that good stuff. If you are not yet subscribed to my channel, please consider subscribing, turning on notifications, hitting that thumbs up. If you think you're subscribed, just make sure to double check that for me, will you? Because YouTube may have made that decision for you. All right, let's read this open letter from Professor Pulverty. See clearly, decide wisely, act justly. To the Board of Trustees and Administration, faculty and staff, present and former students of Converse College, and to the public beyond the college. On June 2nd, 3rd, and 5th, 2020, Professor Newkirk, Provost Barker, and Chair of the Converse College Board of Visitors, Phyllis Farron Harris, respectfully issued passionate and anguished statements following the killing of George Floyd and laid out a series of measures to demonstrate the college's seriousness in addressing the existence of racism and racial bigotry here and in the nation. Among those measures, they included the mandatory viewing of several videos they purport to address the issues of sensitivity, bias, prejudice, diversity, and inclusion. My purpose in addressing the members of the college community is to inform them, that I cannot and will not comply with this mandate and to explain to them, that is the reason for my decision. When I viewed the video of Mr. Floyd's sickening death, I, like all Americans of goodwill, was horrified. But as the days and weeks unfolded and the ensuing protests were accompanied and overwhelmed by atrocity, mayhem, rioting, looting, and yet more murder, I was still more horrified by the images unfolding in my country as they increasingly came to resemble what Jews have always called pogroms. I hope I pronounced that word correctly. I was horrified, too, by the apparent indifference and very encouragement of the chaos of politicians, journalists, celebrities, and yes, the leadership of the academic world, even as the violence consumed the lives and livelihoods of scores of African American communities and their inhabitants. One thing that we heard during this time was silence is complicity. This phrase was invoked in order to lay blame on those who consciously or unconsciously enabled systemic racism to exist in our police departments and in the life and institutions of the nation at large by refusing to acknowledge and denounce it. Evidently responding to this need to denounce racism rather than be complicit in it, Professor Newkirk's, Provost Barker's, and Chairperson Harris' statements contained angry condemnations of Mr. Floyd's and other killing by the police. They pledged to address individually and collectively inside the college and outside it the systemic racism which they perceived to craft measures to eliminate, including, of course, the coercive mandate with which I take issue. Yet all of their statements are strangely silent on the horrors that engulfed and continue to engulf innumerable African American communities and the scores of American cities that lay in ruins after the violence and chaos took their toll. They expressed anguish over the loss of Mr. Floyd's death, but not a word over the murder of David Dorn, the former police captain in St. Louis who perished at the hands of looters, of course, because that's always the way it is, isn't it? Always the way it is. And kudos to him for calling out these blatant contradictions. Our leaders profess that Black Lives Matter, but is it all Black lives or only some Black lives that matter to them? Perhaps they are only concerned about the loss of the Black lives that confirms their political narrative and supports the progressive ideology. Perhaps Black lives, but not Black livelihoods, matter to them. Were their urgent declamations merely panicked virtue signaling to themselves, the college community, and the outside world, or were they genuinely anguished and sincere proclamations grounded in real moral outrage aimed at systemic racism? I do not know, and cannot, and will not judge. Am I and are my colleagues at Converse in need of additional training in order to overcome unconscious bias and prejudice? Perhaps. I shall address the existence of systemic prejudice at Converse College below. Would watching of the videos that our leadership has mandated harm me? Could I benefit from them? Certainly, the answer to the former question is no, and the latter possibly. But my quarrel is not so much with the content of the materials the administration would impose on us, but rather the coercive imposition itself. As an aside, I must admit that I'm already quite familiar with the videos in question and the other materials produced by the company employed by our Office of Diversity and Inclusion. They are at worst inoffensive and at best anodyne. But the administration must be either naive or disingenuous to deny that there is an ideological content and substructure to the material. Does the urge to impose upon us this material derive from a sincere desire to free the college and its members from bigotry? Or from a felt need on the part of leadership and throughout the academic world to impose an ideological conformity which masks itself as an embrace of diversity? Important questions. And this next part of the letter is where Professor I'm gonna call him Jeffrey. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm gonna butcher his last name if I try to say it again. Is where Jeffrey attempts to have a nuanced discussion and dialogue that explains his perspective. Now, we can all guess what's going to happen in this nuanced discussion and dialogue, or rather, how it's going to be received once it gets put out there. But I just want to point out that that's my perception of what he's trying to do here, is say that there's more than one way to look at these things, and I'm offering a different perspective that has apparently not been voiced in his college community. Let's continue. As a kind of preface to my explanation of my refusal to comply with the administration dictate, let me remind you of several unpleasant facts from Jewish history. Even though Paul in Romans teaches that liberty is perhaps the most prescient affluent of faith in the resurrected Christ, and even though Muhammad warns in the Quran that there must be no compulsion in religion, Jews repeatedly during the last 2 millennia were subject to horrific prosecution at the hands of Christian and Muslim authorities. In particular, from 1100 to 1500 in Christian lands, Jews were compelled to engage in forced disputations in order to demonstrate to them the falseness of the Jewish religion. The rabbis and Jewish leaders who were engaged in these debates did not respond with violence or vandalism, but rather summoned dignity and firmness to the rational defense of their faith, often at the risk of and actual suffering of torture, imprisonment, or public shaming for themselves, and the imposition of civil penalties, expulsion, or extermination for their communities. Simultaneously free and unfree, these courageous individuals shine as examples of the power of the free mind to overcome the deprivation of freedom, of the power of the human spirit to triumph over coercion. I hope to follow their example. Is there systemic racism at Converse College? Is there systemic anti-Semitism at Converse College? For most of my 34 years at Converse, I have been its only Jew. Certainly, its only Orthodox Jew. A year after I arrived in 1986, one of my colleagues in the religion department asked me to conduct a model Seder for her class, which I was happy to do. She invited a reporter from the Spartanburg Herald Journal, and the paper subsequently published an account of the Seder with information about me and my background. I received shortly afterwards a prompt and enthusiastic letter from the Ku Klux Klan of the upstate questioning the appropriateness of my teaching at the college. I was gratified and encouraged by the shock and horror of my colleagues here regarding this ironic display of Southern hospitality. I realized that I made a mistake in reading the letter to my mother, who lives in my home state of Illinois, when she grasped and whispered, "Jeff, you've got to get out of South Carolina." Well, I didn't. I stayed put and allowed my life to unfold here. As Converse's only traditional Jew, I have often played the role of informal faculty advisor to Converse's Jewish students. Over the years, I have heard tales from non-Jewish students constantly berating our Jewish students for not believing in Jesus or demanding of them to display their horns. Talk to Michelangelo about that one. As the faculty advisor for many years of Converse College's Association of African American Students, I listened to many of our black students pouring their hearts out to me about the abuse and prejudice they faced from many of our white students. I counseled them to summon patience and to bear with the occasional departures of the college's inhabitants from the college's ideals. I did this in the conviction that the best way to enable our students to overcome the challenges of religious and racial bigotry was to provide them from a genuine and rigorous liberal education which would equip them with the intellectual depth and spiritual fortitude to follow the lead of Booker T. Washington. One would think, Jeffrey, one would think, as paraphrased by my great professor Herbert A. Storing Washington, and all the other great minds that constitute the canon of liberal learning, could teach our students that dignity and self-respect are not within the gift of any man or any law, and to deny that a man consists of his psychological reactions to the psychological prejudice of those around him or her. For many years at Converse, I have been the constant recipient of criticism and disparagement from fellow faculty and even administrators regarding my adherence to traditional Judaism. I have frequently been accused of being unprofessional or lacking in commitment to the college or in devotion to my students because of canceling or rescheduling classes that conflicted with Jewish holidays, or because of non-participation in admissions events or ceremonies such as graduation that once occurred on the Sabbath. Once, when I was falsely suspected of failing to submit my senior grades on time because of observing the festival of the Pentecost, one of the college's administrators remarked, not to me, but concerning me, and reliably reported to me on the following day that we are under no obligation to respect that man's religion. I was furious. But I did not react with threats of hurling bricks through the college's windows or torching its buildings or even employing legal action against it, a recourse available to me as an American that was not available to my Jewish predecessors. Indeed, under my department's chair administrations, and because of the respect, even affection, I bore towards the parties involved, I let go of my anger and maintained my silence. One might have thought that providing students the opportunity to behold an Orthodox Jewish professor laying out a careful, attentive, respectful, and even loving exposition of the New Testament or the Quran might itself constitute the embodiment of the founders' embrace of a truly tolerant and liberal Christianity. One of my students once remarked in a course evaluation, "I just wish my pastor could preach Jesus as good as you." One might have concluded that such experience might outweigh the occasional inconvenience of a missed class or an admissions event, and perhaps constitute an experience of diversity and inclusion that would outweigh the watching of 100 videos touting diversity and inclusion. But evidently, some faculty and some administrators do not agree. I have so much respect for this guy. I really do. I know this is going long, but I think it's very important to read his full letter and understand his full intent and see the nuance in which he is approaching this discussion to really understand the perspective that he's bringing. I'm sorry, that guy's been there for 34 years, man is 68 years old. He says that in the video that I showed you at the top. He deserves this respect and consideration, and I suspect that his college did not give that to him fully. Let's keep going. I am also a Republican and a political conservative. I will not rehearse here the utter lack of intellectual and ideological diversity and the distressing intolerance of conservatives that tend to predominate in the American academic universe and to some degree at Converse. Here is a brief example from my experience. After the unfortunate death from cancer of one of our esteemed colleagues in the English department, Karen Carmaine, who taught film, I conceived of as a fitting memorial to her, which would also enhance the college's culture, the Carmine Film Series. The idea was that several times a year, one of our faculty, but also staff and administrators, would present a favorite film and lead a discussion on it. I worked very hard to bring this idea to fruition and indeed supervised the series for 5 years. At the inaugural reception and the first film, several faculty members and administrators rose and urged me, publicly, not to allow my political beliefs to mar Karen's memory or the integrity of the series. I felt hurt, angry, unappreciated, and humiliated, but said nothing lest the jocularity of the event is overturned. I am almost certain that, had I been a progressive or a Democrat, no such comments would have been uttered or tolerated. I challenge anyone to examine the films presented over the life of the series to see if a political or ideological bias was evidence. Again, where was Converse's embrace of diversity and inclusion? And again, I really want to encourage you all to go and watch the video of him actually speaking that I've posted in the description below, because you're going to see exactly who this person is, and it's obvious that he is genuine and authentic, and I believe everything he's writing in this letter and his perspective, and just respect it so much. Converse College, like the American nation around it, is an imperfect entity, as must any entity engendered by the broken and corrupt human heart be. Converse and America may contain dark and ugly elements that frustrate the attainment of our highest ideals, but in life we must never confront our lowest by abandoning our highest. Unfortunately, this is exactly what the leadership of Converse College has done by imposing this coercive mandate and embracing an expedient to address the problem of racism that departs from the essential nature of a liberal arts institution. The administration has simultaneously invoked and abandoned the founders' ideals. How? By employing one of the ideals in abstraction from the other two. Dexter Edgar Converse hoped to create an institution that would encourage its members to see clearly, decide wisely, and act justly. I have always loved those words because in my mind they encapsulated perfectly the meaning of a liberal education. But liberal derives from liberty. The enlightened mind cannot escape from ignorance and prejudice without freedom of thought. No freedom, no clarity or wisdom. Without clarity and wisdom, justice degenerates into self-righteousness, intolerance, and moral indignation. As the political philosopher Leo Strauss reminds us, indignation is a bad counselor. Our indignation proves at best that we are well-meaning. It does not prove that we are right. I do not dispute that the leadership of Converse College is well-meaning in its attempts to extirpate bigotry, but these attempts must occur within the framework of a liberal education, guided by an essential respect for the freedom and dignity of the individual to think and learn on his or her own. I did not tell President Newkirk or Provost Barker what to read or watch or think. I demand the same respect from them. What am I recommending? By all means, let the leaders of Converse College continue to address the problems of racial bigotry according to their lights. Let them express their opinions on the grave matters, and let them encourage the members of the college community to engage in debates and discussions based upon material that our leaders recommend, even urge. And God willing, let them see beyond ideology and embrace complexity and diversity of opinions and interpretations that these events require. And finally, let them check their coercive impulses at the front gate of the college. The administration has not specified how it will enforce its mandate. Will it prohibit me from assuming my teaching duties? Will it ban me from Converse's administrative structures or public ceremonies? Will it bar my access to the internal means of communication of the college? Will it attach a reprimand to my professional record? Will it lower or cut off my salary? Will it terminate my position? Whatever comes, I believe that I have done the proper and correct thing by refusing to comply with this coercive mandate and by sharing with you the reason for my decision. I have tried to follow the example of my Jewish predecessors by meeting coercion with dignity and firmness. Now, when I talk to you guys about standing up, saying what you believe, being brave in the face of adversity, not backing down because of fear, this is exactly what I mean. I know that not all of you are in a position to do something like this. I completely understand it. But you have to look for opportunities that you do have. Maybe you can't do it at your place of employment. I mean, listen, Jeffrey here is nearing retirement age, if not already there. That's obviously factored into his decision. He's reached the point where he probably can let go of this job and be safe. I know not all of you are in that position. But this is what being brave looks like. With all of its imperfections, I still love the college. I have enjoyed here a long and good life, both professionally and personally. Although my nearly 4 decades at Converse has sometimes seen controversy and turbulence, most of the time here has been characterized by the joy and excitement of pursuing the life of the mind through free inquiry, scholarship, and teaching. Converse College stands poised at the present to transform itself into something other than what it has been. I hope and pray that what will engineer that transformation is merely a change of name, the addition of a few graduate programs, and the admission of men to the undergraduate student body, and not the abandonment by the college of its soul. So, this is a very reasoned, nuanced letter. I think that he's presented his case for why he doesn't want to watch these videos, I think, very well and succinctly. He's presented instances from his perspective where he experienced the same type of intolerance that these videos are hoping to fight. So how do we think this was received? How do we think this was received by the leadership at his college? Well, we know because Inside Higher Education is telling us, going to the mat over diversity training. Political science professor at Converse College says he's facing termination for refusing to complete 2 diversity and anti-bias training modules. This is from today. An associate professor of politics at Converse College in South Carolina says he's facing possible termination for publicly refusing to complete newly mandated diversity and anti-bias training. My department chairman has informed me that the administration intends to dismiss me for insubordination and other reasons, says Professor Jeffrey Pulverde said via email. I'm going to the mat on this one. Good for him. The man has been there for 34 years. He is obviously a very reasoned, conservative individual that frankly probably doesn't need this flipping training. It sounds like he addresses everyone with kindness and consideration. He's been involved in a diverse number of groups. Good for him for standing up and saying no. Pulverde, who denied an interview request citing his attorney's guidance, said that Converse recently told employees to complete mandatory diversity and bias training in response to the murder of George Floyd by the police and other events. Instead of watching the 2 training modules, Pulverde wrote an open letter, the one we just read, to the college explaining his intention to defy the new requirement. He also expressed outrage that the college's previous public statements condemning Floyd's murder did not also condemn protests that turned violent. In particular, Pulverde mentioned David Dorn, the late black retired police officer who was killed while providing security to a store in St. Louis in June. And then it quotes from the letter. Of the training mandate, Pulverde said, "Am I and my colleagues at Converse in need of this training?" Okay, so it quotes from the letter. Explaining that he has long been Converse's only Jewish faculty member, Pulverde also says he's faced criticism for canceling classes on religious holidays. So they're basically just doing a recap of the letter here, which we just read. Let's see. Converse president, Poverde has posted a reading of his letter and some additional commentary on YouTube, which gives the video in the description below. In it, he explains that Converse is currently a women's college that will soon become co-ed and change its name to Converse University with the introduction of some new graduate programs. And so the college's nature is already in flux, he said. Poverde says he is a scholar of American ideas and a patriot who once was stopped for speeding because he was overtaken by the power of his own solo rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. I love this guy. Converse president Kristen Newkirk sent her own response to students about Poverde's letter. The memo said that the required training modules take a very broad definition of diversity: gender, gender identity, religion, disability, ethnicity, etc., although you notice that there's no diversity of thought in there, and remind us that we need to be considerate and respectful of those in our community. What was not considerate or respectful about his letter? President Newkirk, what was not considerate and respectful about his letter? Well, I understand that no one likes receiving a mandate, she said. They are very seldom issued here at Converse. Newkirk further explained that Converse sent the modules to employees in March as recommended training. 38% of employees watched them at the time, but given recent events, she said, I thought it was important that we all complete this training that reinforces Converse core values. The mandate stands, and each and every employee and faculty member is expected to complete this training by August 3rd. So we're going to find out next week if Jeffrey still has a job. As for freedom of speech, Newkirk says it's not in violation of employees' First Amendment rights to require training, which is legit. All institutions require employees to go through professional development training. That's not true. I worked in higher ed for like 10 years. That is not true. Including public higher education institutions. I worked at 3 different colleges. I worked at Norwich University in Vermont. I worked at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. I worked at Southern New Hampshire University. I cannot think, and this is off the top of my head, I could be wrong. I cannot think of one training that was required of the entire staff at any of those 3 schools. Meanwhile, Converse, is a private liberal arts institution where we value the opportunity to participate in the free and responsible exchange of ideas with the belief that through rigorous and civil debate, the best and most logical ideas will rise to the top. This doesn't sound like a rigorous and civil debate, President Newkirk. It sounds like a mandate. This is actually what you are doing is exactly the goddamn opposite of a rigorous and civil debate. It is the opposite. Mandating something is not a debate. The right to freedom of speech is balanced by our policy on discrimination. No, it's really not. Newkirk continued, Converse does not tolerate discrimination based on race, color, creed, religion, sexual... Religion! Dude already said he was discriminated based on his religion. Where were you then? Religion, sexual orientation, disability, age, national and ethnic origin, veteran status, genetic information, or any other status protected by federal, state, and local law. And the problem, of course, is that unless you live in Washington, D.C., you are not protected from discrimination for your political beliefs. That has got to change. I don't know how we even start to fix these things until that is mandated by law that you cannot fire someone because of their political beliefs. Seemingly addressing Poverde's anecdotes about not reporting his own experiences with possible discrimination, Newkirk also said that any students who have been advised that they should not talk about incidents of discrimination or harassment, but instead should simply be patient and wait for those issues to resolve themselves. Let me set the record straight. That is not right. That contradicts our goal of teaching you to use your voice, and that is not what our policies say. What did this professor do? He used his voice. Apparently that doesn't apply to people with his particular beliefs, though. You only use your voice if you agree with us. Then it's okay. Newkirk said that tenured faculty members, presumably including Poverde, are afforded certain rights and actions involving personnel are confidential. Please know that this matter is being addressed within the confines of Converse's policy and the law. In the meantime, she said students concerned about being enrolled in a course in which they worry they may face discrimination should contact administrators. Oh my God. What history does this professor have with discriminating against students? In fact, it looks like he's the one that's been discriminated against by the college, if anything. Newkirk said in her memo that she's been contacted by students aggrieved by Pulverde's letter. Did they even read the dang letter? And why are we not encouraging those students to have a rigorous discussion and debate about the letter? But Pulverde blames Newkirk for students who have been subsequently called him a racist. In further campus communication with colleagues, Pulverde shared part of an email he sent to an anonymous student who accused him of bias. You do not tell me what you think racist means or how you detect that quality in my letter. We read his entire open letter. What was racist? Where did he even talk about race? He talked about his experiences. Apparently, the experiences of a Jewish professor are now racist. One distressing aspect of our current political and academic discourse to me is how quickly we all resort to hurling epithets rather than seriously listening to each other. I'll confess my least favorite examples of this are racist, fascist, and insensitive. Such terms are not intended to refute an opponent, but rather to silence him or her. They are the verbal equivalent of a brick toss or a baseball bat swing. He added, "Were my comments racist because I am white and Jewish?" I think that's a great question. So this article keeps going. I'm not going to read the rest of it, but I'll link it in the description below so you can go and read it yourself. It looks like next week, because they mandated the training by August 3rd. August 3rd is next week. So we're going to find out if Professor Pulverde still has a job and see what he's up to next. Hopefully Inside Higher Ed will do a follow-up. We'll have to pay attention to it, but man, let's give this guy a slow clap. Come on, this guy deserves a slow clap. Thank you, Jeffrey Pulverde, for standing up, being brave, writing a beautiful open letter, saying what you think. This guy's one of my new heroes. You never quite know where your heroes are going to come from. It's always interesting when they pop up, seemingly out of nowhere.